of course, that if I don't get them, I'll buy a drugstore. So what are you going to do with a fellow like that? In a minute, if you got too tough with him, I think he would have thrown you out of the house. Right, Dick? I think you're gone. I'm sure that the guys, I know that the guys tried very hard. And Colonel never said anything about it, but I heard him talking to Elvis about it. And tough. And it sounds like you can just do it for their own good. You can do it because you love them. But it's like anybody in that situation, if you've ever known them, it was difficult to talk to Elvis about things, personal. You know, he was the king.
And at the end of the day, nobody told Elvis what to do. Nobody. Not even Colonel Parker.
The thing with Elvis is, as they've all said, Elvis knew how powerful he was. And you didn't tell him. I'm probably one of the few people that could tell him no on some things. And that was security problems only. You don't want to go down through this doorway because there's a live tiger on the other side. He would listen to me. But I also knew the limitations of what I could do. He would want to fly somewhere, and I happened to know that there was a bad engine on it, and I would tell him, no, you can't fly in the Lisa Marie aircraft because we have an oil leak in the number 3 engine. That was it. He wouldn't argue with me. I would tell him, no, you can't go over there to that crowd. We don't know what's there. Well, he usually didn't pay attention to that one, and afterwards he'd say, I'm sorry, Dick, I promise never to do it again, which he would. But you didn't tell because, and I know for personal fact, that Elvis did not use the street drugs that everybody kind of alludes to that he was involved in. He didn't do cocaine, he didn't do heroin. As long as I knew him, and I don't know what he might have done before 1967, he didn't smoke marijuana. Now, when he was in the military, and he and I've talked about it, he was given certain drugs, amphetamines, to keep him awake in case the Russians start coming our way. That was one of the problems at the time. We also know, if you pay attention to what really good work somebody has done as an investigative, Elvis had some problems. He slept. He had problems sleeping, rather. And that was one of the things why he took sleeping pills. Well, anybody can tell you that if you take sleeping pills or any kind of pill, long enough, your body will develop resistance to it. So instead of taking one, he might take 2. Well, they would change the sleeping pills. Dr. Nick was very good at that. He would watch, and there was a big one out called Placidil at the time, which was a liquid-filled, gelled capsule. And Elvis, they switched him onto that from something else. Well, in order to control that, because Elvis was smart enough, he could look and he could tell you exactly what a prescription from a doctor said. The only person that knew more than that was Ricky Stanley, who could write a prescription better than any doctor could. Now, Ricky and a lot of the others did take drugs, but they didn't give them to Elvis. And I think that's one reason if some of those people said something to him, he would ignore it, because it's like, why are you talking to me? You take these drugs. And that's kind of the thing that went on in some cases. But Dr. Nick would take and try to make him Placidils. He would suck the liquid out of these Placidils and make them placebos. You know, so it was a game, but Elvis always was ahead of the game. He knew, and he thought it would make him better for his fans, strictly for his fans. He didn't get any charge out of it himself. He always wanted to be able to sing and perform for his fans. And he had other personal problems, an enlarged heart. His heart had problems with cholesterol, which was something in 76, 77 you didn't talk about. Nobody knew about it. It wasn't big news. Today, anytime you buy something in a grocery store, you look at it and it'll tell you how much cholesterol is in it. That wasn't there. Nobody knew the dangers of it. That's stuff that came out. But he had major problems with cholesterol. I know that for a fact. So you have to look at all those things, and in simple essence, Elvis died because his heart stopped. Nothing else.
Hi, this is a question for Greg. Really enjoyed the positivity that you had for the Colonel. And I know that you said you're going to maybe tour in the future. I was wondering, would you maybe put your memoirs and these positive things into a book? Because I 100% would buy it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we're certainly working on that now with my sons and the guys. We're planning on doing a little touring and talking a lot about the Colonel. And there's a lot of things that I always try to bring up. There was a time in the 70s when Elvis decided to sell his catalog to RCA, his 50s catalog, his 60s hits. And a lot of people don't understand, and they blame the Colonel. But this is one time when I was in the office, and Vernon and Elvis came into the MGM office and told the Colonel that they had been in touch with RCA, which usually didn't happen by then. And they had offered $3 million for Elvis's early hits, all the early 50 songs, to buy it out flat so that Elvis wouldn't receive royalties anymore, but he'd get a one lump check. Well, the Colonel said, that's crazy. Don't do that. And Elvis was saying that he had to get the Lisa Marie out of the shop because they were installing the air stairs. Well, then he didn't have to get on top of my pickup truck in Palm Springs anymore, but that they were going to install the air stairs, and it was a fortune. I think it was $750,000, and to finish the plane so he could pick his plane up. And the Colonel said, well, you can't sell those future royalties. And they had quite a discussion about it, and ultimately Elvis told him, if you don't do it, I'll have the attorney that had done the divorce with he and Priscilla. And the Colonel said, I'll do it, but I have to renegotiate. So the Colonel got it from $3 million to $5.5 million, and it was still a bad deal. And the Colonel talked to me all the way back to Palm Springs about this as a mistake, but he didn't want to not do the deal. And he's been beat up for that for the last 30 years. And it's not, that was a time I was never much in the meetings between Elvis and the Colonel. I wasn't an executive. And I heard that one go on, and Vernon was siding with Elvis because he knew they were going to get the money in. But that's cost the estate, I don't know, $100 million over the last 40 years. And that one's not on the Colonel, but if you read these crazy books, they all blame the Colonel. Made no sense. He was too smart for that. And I just bring that up out of the air because that's one of the issues.
I have to back absolutely what Greg said, because I wasn't in that particular conversation and meeting, but I happened to be there when Elvis and the Colonel, Vernon wasn't there, met and were talking, and Elvis was telling the Colonel what he wanted to do, and the Colonel said, let me negotiate, let me see what we can really do. And Elvis said, you do it now, or I will get somebody to do it. And it was not, the Colonel tried his best to talk Elvis out of making that mistake.
Hello guys, thanks for talking to us for so long this afternoon. My question is concerning the 68 comeback special. I wondered if any of you were involved in the setting up of that, or were you there when it happened? Please.
Not me.
Well, I was certainly young, but I was around at that time and I knew what the issues were. And a lot of the issues, 68 Comeback Special was one of the best television concerts I've ever seen. It was terrific. And Steve Binder was the director and he did a good job. The problem, which you might be thinking about, is that the Colonel went to the Singer Sewing Machine Company and he sold them a Christmas special. And he sold it to them for a fortune. So this was Elvis's first real TV show, and he was doing a comeback, even though they didn't call it the Comeback Special then. So the Colonel arranged for Singer Sewing Machines to buy 300,000 albums in advance and keep them, and have them exclusively in the Singer Sewing stores. So he knew that win, lose, or draw, when Elvis did this TV special, that he'd come out the next week in the charts with the #1 album. Now, that was a big deal. It's always a big deal, but the guarantee on that was they had to pay the television show, they had to pay for the ads and the production. Well, there was a falling out between the Colonel and Steve Binder, the director, about whether it would be a Christmas show. Well, you know, they both had a point of view. I'm glad sort of that Steve Binder won the argument because the show turned out to be amazing. But the Colonel is sweating through that whole week because he knows he's promised RCA and NBC a Christmas show. Well, there was girls, what was the song, doing the hoochie coo? What was the, it was like a bordello scene, and this was supposed to be a family show for children. And it was supposed to be a Christmas show. Well, Elvis was torn, but Steve had a great idea about Elvis sitting in the middle of a room with his black leather suit and doing his early rock and roll, which turned out to be just great. But if that show hadn't gone well, the Colonel's issue was this, that if Singer Sewing Machine refused to pay the bill because they didn't get a Christmas show for families, they would have asked for the money back. And the fee they paid Elvis, plus the 300,000 albums, they didn't have the money. I know people can't understand that, but it would have taken them a long time to pay that money back for that show. And I'm glad it turned out like it did, but the Colonel had some issues too. He was trying to bring Elvis back with #1 album.
Okay, we've got time for just a couple more questions. We've got one down here. Anybody else? Yeah? Oh, okay, and I'll do the last one down there. Hold on, Mike.
This is one for Dick, actually. Dick, can you give us a few stories about some of the problems that Stanley's gave you at the time you were there with them?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. There's a lot of stories going around that Stanley's gave you quite a bit of problems at the time when they were living with Elvis at Graceland and bailed them out once or twice. Can you give one or two stories about those?
Well, if I understood the question, the Stanley boys.
Yeah.
Okay. Billy Stanley, who was the oldest, was he was the smart one of the group for his age. He was very mature. He left Elvis kind of in the early 70s. He came back once, twice. I've met Billy. I know Billy. I think Billy